Hello, I'm William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and I may look a little frazzled today. We had our monthly Dominican chapter meeting in Charlotte, so I was away for most of the day, but now that I'm settled back at home, I've wanted to respond to a request from a friend to post a talk on women, and specifically to refer to the valiant woman described for us in detail in Proverbs 31. So in this talk, I'm not going to do it as a walk talk because I'd like to actually look at the text of Proverbs 31, so I've saved this one until I had some time at my desk so I could share the text as we go through it. But I'd like to read through Proverbs 31, where this valiant woman is described for us, and her characteristic and habits are described for us, and talk about what this woman would look like in the 21st century, because after all, that's the question. You know, it's one thing to describe a woman back in, this was written in the time, let's say, of Solomon, 950 years before Christ. But what does such a woman look like today who would live according to these same principles, practice these same virtues, and so on? So what I'd like to do is just move over to the text here. I'll keep myself down in the corner. But I'd like to read through Proverbs 31 and just talk about this. This isn't a scripted or planned talk. It would have been a walk talk if it didn't refer to a specific, passage of Scripture that I don't have memorized or anything like that. So let's just go through the text together and talk about it. And I hope that this reading and discussion stirs up some new discussions, some new thoughts, allowing us to meditate on this passage and think about what this valiant woman looks like in the 21st century. Now, obviously for women, this is very important. You have a divinely inspired description of the life of a valiant woman. So for women, this is very important. But for men, it's also important because, for me, let's say as a husband, I have here a description of what God judges to be a valiant woman, and I have to check myself to ask whether what I look for or expect from my wife is in line with what God tells me I should be looking for in my wife. So it's good for men to look at this as well. It's good for young men to look at this who are considering getting married in the future. Here's a description of a valiant woman. And there's a number of different ways we can read this, of course. We know that in Catholic tradition, there's a number of different senses in which the Scriptures can be understood. As a layman, I think it's wise for me to stick to the literal reading of the Scriptures in the text and not get into what are called spiritual interpretations, reading into it mystically or allegorically or even morally, but take it at face value as it is a historical text that teaches us something that is real in the flesh. So in the time when this was written, it was understood to describe a valiant woman. So we can read into it in different senses and draw meditations out from it, but that's really not my interest in this talk. I usually don't do any teaching like that publicly because it's really reserved for the authority of the church to open up spiritual interpretations of Scripture. But let's read the text and simply work to understand and reflect on the details of the actual text of sacred Scripture. So let's look through this 31st chapter, the last chapter in the book of Proverbs, and see what we can find, see what it has to say, and then talk about some applications or implications that we might consider in our generation, which, like I said, is 2,900 years removed from the time that this was written. First of all, the Proverbs are written by King Solomon, but if we look at Proverbs 31, In verse 1 we read that this is not from Solomon, but it says, the words of King Lemuel, the vision wherewith his mother instructed him. So this is not a proverb of Solomon. This is a vision that was received by some King Lemuel. So make that note before we begin, and then let's just look at the text here. What we see is the passage of the valiant woman really doesn't even begin until verse 10. So if you look down here at verse 10, it says, who shall find a valiant woman? And from 10 to the end of the chapter, this is where we have this description of this valiant woman. So these opening 9 verses are introductory. Let's just read them for the sake of being complete. What, O my beloved, what, O the beloved of my womb, what, O the beloved of my vows? Give not thy substance to women, and thy riches to destroy kings. Give not to kings, O Lemuel. This is a mother speaking to her son, who is a king. So keep these details in mind. Give not to kings, O Lemuel. Give not wine to kings, because there is no secret where drunkenness reigneth. So she warns him of bad habits. And lest they drink and forget judgments and pervert the cause of the children of the poor. She's warning him of the dangers of drunkenness. Verse 6, give strong drink to them that are sad, and wine to them that are grieved in mind. Let them drink and forget their want, and remember their sorrow no more. Open thy mouth for the dumb, and for the causes of all the children that pass. Open thy mouth, decree that which is just, and do justice to the needy and the poor. So in the first 9 verses, we have these general counsels of be good from a mother to her son. Pretty simple. But again, it's important for us to realize that this is a king that we're talking about here, being counseled by his mother. So we pick up with the real subject in verse 10. So let's read this. Who shall find a valiant woman? Who shall find a valiant woman? Far and from the uttermost coasts is the price of her. So this mother advising her son says, this great treasure that you're to seek, this great treasure of incalculable price is a valiant woman. And where will you find her? How can you find a valiant woman? Who shall find a valiant woman? Far and from the uttermost coasts is the price of her. Verse 11. Here we get into the description of her character. The heart of her husband trusteth in her. The heart of her husband trusteth in her, and he shall have no need of spoils. So, characteristic number 1, she's trustworthy. And notice that has nothing to do with any sort of historical context. It's not limited by any time or place. She's trustworthy. Her husband trusts in her. So that's a general moral principle, a characteristic of this woman that doesn't have any specific, detailed, practical application. She's simply trustworthy. Her husband trusts in her. He shall have no need of spoils. He shall have no need of spoils, of losses, or of any need of great riches. He shall have no need of spoils. He trusts in her. She's trustworthy. Verse 11. Verse 12. She will render him good and not evil all the days of her life. She will render him good and not evil all the days of her life. So again, another general moral principle. She's good. She does good to her husband. She doesn't do good. She doesn't do evil to her husband, and she is committed to a married life. She does so all the days of her life. She is married until death ends that marriage. She renders him good and not evil all the days of her life. So far, we've got 2 general moral principles or characteristics. She is trustworthy, and she's good. Pretty simple. Verse 13, she hath sought wool and flax, and hath wrought or worked by the counsel of her hands. She hath sought wool and flax, and hath wrought by the counsel of her hands. So she's a worker. She's industrious. It refers to wool and flax, and we can read that very narrowly and say it's particularly referring to, let's say, clothes making or working with fabrics. She hath sought wool and flax, and hath wrought by the counsel of her hands. She's industrial and skillful and practical, right? She's working with wool and flax. So again, we've seen three things so far. She's trustworthy, she's good, she's industrious, and she works by the counsel of her hands. She's skillful. She's a skillful, industrious, good, trustworthy woman. That's what we've learned so far. Not afraid of manual labor, not afraid of working. She considers it her responsibility to help with the work of the household. Trustworthy, good, committed, stable, industrious, and so on. We're starting to get this picture of this valiant woman. Let's keep going. Verse 14. She is like the merchant's ship. She bringeth her bread from afar. She is like the merchant's ship. She bringeth her bread from afar. If you don't know what this image of the merchant's ship is, in the ancient world, there were no supermarkets, no Amazon.com, none of the shipping or transportation like we have, no UPS, no FedEx. And so for different people, different groups, different cities or countries to exchange goods based on what resources were available in different places, there were merchant ships that simply sailed about the coastline of, let's say, the Mediterranean Sea. And they would go from port to port in a cycle. And so they would pick up things in Egypt and they would sell things in Egypt, and then the ship would move on and maybe it would settle somewhere along the coast of Israel, and it would move up the coast and then around maybe into the Greek islands and things like that. But these merchant ships sailed around the coastlines, just bouncing from place to place along the coastlines, trading goods and allowing goods to be traded between cities all around the Mediterranean Sea. That's what the merchant's ship did. You really can't compare it to anything today. I can't think of anything like that. It would be like a traveling truck. Like, imagine if the UPS truck came around, but you could not only get products from it, but also sell products to it, and then it would take your products to the next stop. So there's nothing really comparable in our society, like a traveling store that's both buying and selling goods. But that's how the merchant's ship worked in the ancient world. And it says, she's like the merchant's ship. She brings her bread from afar. And so here's sort of a puzzling little detail for us to think about. What does it mean that she brings her bread from afar? She's like the merchant's ship. She brings her bread from afar. Now, I invite you to think about that and meditate on what it means for her to bring her bread from afar. Now, my own thoughts on this, she's like a merchant's ship. One of the benefits of the merchant's ship, one of the benefits of trade, between different regions, is it allows us to get higher quality products, because another place may have better resources, or they may just be committed to a certain craft, and allowing us to get our stuff from that place allows us, where we are, to have a higher quality of product. So the merchant's ship allows the quality and probably the cost of products to be better. better quality, better prices. She's like that. She's like the merchant's ship. She brings her bread from afar. So I think what we have to say about that comment there is that she's seeking as this manager of the household. She's seeking quality goods, and she's trying to obtain those goods at good costs. So she's seeking quality products for her family. She's like a merchant's ship. That's what a merchant's ship does. She brings her bread from afar, from a distant place, where we assume the bread is good and better than she could get locally or that she could make herself. So she's prudent in her pursuit of the needs of her household. She's concerned with quality. She brings her bread from afar. That's verse 14. And like I said, think about these lines. What do you think that refers to? That she's like a merchant's ship, and she brings her bread from afar. That's the challenge of reading Scripture, to read and think about the details of the passage we're reading and meditate on what exactly the Holy Spirit is teaching us in these verses. Verse 14. On to verse 15. She has risen in the night. She has risen in the night and given a prey to her household and victuals to her maidens. She hath risen in the night and given a prey to her household and victuals to her maidens. Having risen at night most likely means she rises while it's still dark, and she prepares food for her household. She's given a prey, food, an animal, a prey to her household, and victuals, foods, to her maidens. So she's the early to bed, early to rise type of person. She's to use this word in an old sense, she's providential. She's looking ahead and making preparation for her household. She rises while it's still dark, before anyone else is ready, in order to prepare things for them. She's providential. She's looking ahead and preparing things in advance. She's given a prey to her household, victuals to her maidens. And notice the selflessness in that kind of life. She doesn't wake up in the morning expecting someone to have gotten up and prepared something for her. She rose and she prepared, she provided for the members of her household. She hath risen in the night and given a prey to her household and victuals to her maidens. Verse 16, she hath considered a field and bought it. She hath considered a field and bought it. And this is where I think this image of this woman that's commonly interpreted as sort of this suburban stay-at-home mom begins to be challenged. She hath considered a field and bought it. And notice the next part of the verse, with the fruit of her hands she hath planted a vineyard. She hath considered a field and bought it. With the fruit of her hands she hath planted a vineyard. So in verse 16 here, we saw before that she's industrious. But here we see that she's got something of an entrepreneurial spirit. She considers a field and buys it. She's looking to invest what she has and use the resources that she has to make more gains. She's looking to gain honest income. She considers a field that it would be useful and that she could make good use of it in order to produce something necessary. She considers a field and she buys it. She buys it. Now, we're not told there whether she buys it with some, like a dowry that she brings into the marriage, or whether she buys it with money that's made available to her by her husband for her to manage as the manager of his household. But She considers a field and buys it. And I think that verse there challenges the common, what I think is an overly simplified view of this valiant woman, in that she's not just this stay-at-home suburban lady who's, in the house, goes grocery shopping, does some crafts around the house, cleans the house. This woman is not so quiet a lady. She's out and about, and I'm not saying wild in the streets, of course, but she's got her eyes outside of her own home, thinking about doing things to benefit her family. It says she considers a field and buys it. And notice this next part, with the fruit of her hands, that is with her own products or money she makes from her products, she hath planted a vineyard. Whether that means she personally planted it or helped to plant it or paid to have it planted. But look at the character of this woman. I don't think it fits within this overly simplified suburban housewife. She hath considered a field and bought it. With the fruits of her hands she hath planted a vineyard. She is taking the resources that are available to her, and she's multiplying them. She's using them to make good investments and taking profits from things that she makes and rolling them back into her household activities to try and generate more good things for her family. So verse 16, I'd put an asterisk next to that verse, as that's sort of a stereotype buster, I think, as to what this woman looks like in Proverbs 31. She's an active lady. She's not sitting around, looking for idle things to do to keep her busy. She's got stuff in mind that she'd like to do, things that she'd like to pursue for the sake of her husband and household. Verse 16. Down to verse 17. She hath girded her loins with strength, and hath strengthened her arm. She hath girded her loins with strength, and hath strengthened her arm. She's a strong woman. So again, the delicate little fragile flower that tiptoes around the house like Tinkerbell, that's not the image of this valiant woman. She hath girded her loins with strength, and it literally says, she hath strengthened her arm. Now, we can't go wacky with this and say, oh yeah, she goes to the gym and works out. I mean, we've got to keep everything together here. All of these details have to stay together, and there's more to come. So nevertheless, we see that she's industrious. She is entrepreneurial. She is looking to help build her household. She's rising while it's still dark. She's providing for the members of her household, and so on. So keep all of these details, sort of continue to color in this picture and add these details, because I don't think that this woman looks, if we actually read these passages, I don't think she looks like Susie Homemaker. And that's the normal stereotype that this is kind of twisted into. She's girded her loins with strength, and hath strengthened her arm. She's physically strong. Verse 18, she hath tasted and seen that her traffic is good. She hath tasted and seen that her traffic is good. And this word traffic means her business, her trading activity, her traffic. She judges for herself that the work that she's done is good. So she's not this sort of dum-dum that just follows instructions. She understands the principles. She understands what's needed, and she can make those judgments for herself. She can evaluate good dealings by herself. She herself is prudent in these things. She's not just a robot that follows instructions. She understands the goals. She understands the means to those goals, and she can evaluate things and see that what she's doing is good. She can manage herself, supervise her own work. Her lamp shall not be put out in the night. Her lamp shall not be put out in the night. And that gives us an image of what's called vigilance, or, working to get things done, staying awake. Think of the parable that Jesus teaches of the virgins who have their lamps lit because they're waiting for their husband. And you have that image of vigilance, that readiness and waiting. Her lamp shall not be put out at night. In other words, she's paying attention to what's going on. She's taking responsibility for her own activities. She's taking responsibility for her own traffic, like it said, her own business activity. And she takes responsibility for it where, her lamp is on at night. She's up working and thinking and planning and preparing, thinking about what's coming. And this relates to prudence, because the Proverbs teach us that the prudent sees evil coming and avoids it. And so when we see this woman presented to us as a person who is sort of looking into the future, not anxiously, but prudently, she's looking into the future to see what's coming, to make good decisions, to prepare things in advance, so that she can, for the sake of her family, help to avoid any evil that might come. She takes that responsibility upon herself. She takes responsibility for her. She doesn't act like a dependent in the household. She acts like a co-worker with her husband. Remember, this passage is the king's mother talking to him about a valiant woman, about how valuable she is, and how important it is for him, as the king, to find a valiant woman to make his wife. She hath tasted and seen that her traffic is good. Her lamp shall not be put out at night. Verse 19. She hath put out her hand to strong things, and her fingers have taken hold of the spindle. So here again we have an image of her working. And this is dated historically, like I said. This is 2,900 years old or so. But we see that she's a woman that is not afraid of work. She puts out her hand to strong things. Her fingers have taken hold of the spindle. That is, she's doing the work that her household needs to be done. She's not a woman who's averse to manual labor, as we've seen. She's not trying to keep herself as this delicate little powdered flower that sits around the house. She considers herself part of the management of the house, responsible for all of the needs of those who are true dependents in the household. She puts out her hand to strong things, and her fingers have taken hold of the spindle. Now, the tendency, I think, is to read this in the 21st century and say, oh, well, look at the kinds of things that she does. She's planting. She's, she's working the spindle. She's spinning wool or yarn, whatever kind it may be. Look at the sort of tasks she's doing. We should take those tasks, we should label those as what valiant women do, and we should do those same tasks today. And we often see that. We often see this simplistic, literal transitioning from what we read in the text to what a woman actually does in the 21st century, taking up these ancient, activities and say, oh, these are timeless. Well, they're really not timeless, okay? Because keep all of this in context. This is a lady who is said to be like a merchant ship. This is a lady whose lamp is not put out at night. This is a lady girded with strength. This is a lady who puts her hand out to strong things, who considers a field and buys it, who sees and understands that her business activity is profitable, who's rolling profits that she makes into other projects to be more productive. This isn't a lady who's simply looking to sort of play a character. She's engaged with her own society. She's engaged with the market as it exists, where and when she lives. She's like the merchant ship. She's not simply trying to play a role to dress a certain way, to look a certain way, to have a list of certain activities she does. This is a woman who's engaged in her generation in the activity of her culture, in business, which is constantly changing and unpredictable. Her lamp shall not be put out at night. She's vigilant. So I don't think it's reasonable to try and create some sort of character, with a list of specific activities that she did, and then bring them literally into modern society and say, this is what a Proverbs 30 woman does. She sits around spinning wool. She puts out her hand to the spindle. Oh, therefore I have to go and I have to buy myself, a loom and spin my own wool. I have to be like No, she's a woman who is engaged in business doing profitable works. The market would determine what kind of works she's going to do. In her generation, 2,900 years ago, that's what was to be done. There were no, power looms like we have today, where weavers can just crank out miles and miles and miles of fabrics. I recommend that you, go on Google and search for the weavers in Peru, the women who live down in Peru, who have maintained this tradition of weaving, and look at the quality of work they do. This isn't some kind of hobby craft. This is serious, skillful work that's done, with grueling toil. So it's not hobby activities. It's not hobby sewing. It's not hobby, spinning or crocheting and things like that. We're not talking about hobbies. This is a lady who's turning profits in the work that she does. She's not going, out to the craft store and spending $250 to buy supplies to come home and play with. She's not making, she's not making scarves and hats for her kids as sort of fun little craft projects. She's not making hot hands for the kitchen or maybe some bathroom rugs. This is a lady who's doing real necessary work for her family, working profitably, engaged with the market herself. So it's not a hobby life. And I think that's important to see here. She's not just sitting around doing arts and crafts and hobbies, claiming to be, a traditional woman. She's engaged in the market. She's an active, contemporary woman in her generation, doing the works in her generation that brought forth fruits that she could then use, like we read before, with the fruit of her hands she hath planted a vineyard. She's converting these fruits that she's producing into other projects. It's not hobby housewifery. It's real, practical business activity. I mean, it's referred to as traffic. That's what it's referred to as. She's working as a woman, working profitably, not as a hobby, but as a profitable undertaking, and is rolling the fruits of her work back into her household and providing for that household or for part of the needs of that household in her own way. So, moving on, verse 20. Verse 20, she hath opened her hand to the needy and stretched out her hands to the poor. Now, we can say this shows that she has a religious spirit. She's merciful. She's charitable. And that's true. But there's more to it than that, I think. If she's working to help to provide for the good of her household. I don't want to say the needs of her household, because we don't know that she's working to actually generate the needs of her household. That's something different, because we get into the duties of the men as well. A man is responsible to provide for the family. What my wife and I talk about, when we talk about my wife's work and things like that, I tell my wife, look, It's my responsibility to provide for the needs of our family. Anything our family needs is my responsibility. And therefore, if my wife, because my wife wants to work, she wants to help me, she wants to do things. She's a skilled, prudent woman. She's industrious. She's vigilant. She has many of these qualities. She doesn't want to sit around idle or just go play like a child. She wants to help. And what I tell my wife is, I think what's proper is that the head of the household, the husband, he's responsible for the needs of the family. So whatever the family needs, food, clothing, housing, education, all the normal expenses of family life, those are the husband's responsibility. The wife cannot be asked to generate the income that covers the cost of family life. Especially if she's going to be pregnant, bearing children, nursing children. She can't have pressure on her to keep the house afloat. That pressure of keeping the family provided for in all their needs, that's the husband's responsibility. He's not burdened with pregnancy. He's not burdened with breastfeeding or taking care of infants and things like that. He's free to work around the clock year after year after year. There's no excuse why he can't provide for the needs of his family if he himself is valiant. So again, with my wife and our relationship, what we normally say is, I work to provide for the needs of our family. And if my wife does work, her work is used to improve our quality of life. That's how we look at it. It's my responsibility to provide and allow our family to live with everything that they need comfortably. And I can't stop working until I fulfill that obligation. And if my wife wants to work, she doesn't take that burden on herself. She works with the motivation being to enrich the family, to improve our quality of life, to make things nicer, to be able to have money in her pocket that she can buy something for the kids or buy something for our daughter when they're out or pick up a pair of ballet shoes or things like that, things that improve our quality of life. That's why, if you think about it like that, when you come to verse 20, the fact that this woman is generous reveals more than that she's simply merciful. Because if my wife went out with, let's say, with my debit card in her hand, and she took money out of the bank that I earned with my work and put in our account, and she went around dishing that money out to poor people, that's not charitable work. She's handing out things that she herself didn't produce. It's not that charitable. It's good, but it's not charitable. It's not praiseworthy. And I don't think that is what verse 20 is telling us, that she's just a lady who, throws open the household money box and hands out money anytime that somebody needy comes along. I think it's saying more than that. This is a woman who we've been reading for, 10 or so verses now. This is a woman who's industrious. She's working to do profitable work. The challenge of profitable work is that when you do make a profit, that profit becomes your seed money for the next thing. I mean, literally, she plants a vineyard. Literally, seed money. The work that she does brings a profit. She takes that profit and she literally plants it in the ground. It's very hard to make a profit to begin with, and then it's very difficult to take that profit and then do something else profitable with it. And so when you think that out of this profit that she has in her hands, which she earned, we're assuming this is talking about her money, her resources. She sees someone else in need, and from that money that she herself is producing, she takes out of that money and gives to the needy. It says, she hath opened her hand to the needy. She stretches out her hands to the poor. In other words, the work that she's doing, which produces profit, she's willing to sacrifice some of that profit of her own work. She's willing to sacrifice some of that profit to help others. And so it's not just being merciful. It's also showing a number of different qualities in her. She's unselfish. She's not averse to work. She's not complaining that she can't keep all of her profits. She's open to work. She likes to work. She knows that work is necessary and good, and she sees the good that her work does. This is what St. Paul teaches in the New Testament. He says, work that you may share. It's not just to make a profit, not just to hoard every extra dollar that we can generate, but it's also good to work if you are capable of working skillfully, as this woman is, to be able to generate a profit and then be able to not only use that profit for your own needs or for your own future pursuits, but to be able to share that profit as well. So you can see how verse 20 there, that she takes this money that she herself is working to produce and is willing to share it with others. That reveals a number of different virtues in her, not just that, she's nice to poor people, which for some people may not even be a sacrifice. If we pull up to a red light and a homeless man walks up to my car asking for money, of course the kids in the back seat are going to be yelling, give him $100, because to them, they think of being nice with no consequence, no sacrifice at all. And so the difficulty in being merciful and being generous is that it comes out of your own profits. And if it's not coming out of your own profits, there's really no virtue in it. So we have to assume in verse 20 that not only is she opening her hand to the needy and stretching out her hands to the poor, but she's sharing her own profits, the fruits of her own work. She's sharing with others, and that reveals more of her virtue and is more praiseworthy. So that's verse 20. Verse 21, she shall not fear for her house in the cold of snow, for all her domestics are clothed with double garments. She shall not fear for her house in the cold of snow. Her domestics are clothed with double garments. We saw before, her light does not go out at night. She's up while it's still dark out. She is a vigilant woman. She's looking ahead like the prudent do, trying to see what evils might come and prepare so that she might avoid them. Not with some kind of godless, anxious spirit, but with a responsible spirit. She's calm. She's not afraid. She shall not fear for her house in the cold of snow, because she's provided for it. She's looked ahead and prepared and provided. All her domestics are clothed with double garments. So those who are in her household, who work in her household, she doesn't barely clothe them or give them as little as possible, to make her own life comfortable. That's the evil of slavery. When we think about slavery, the evil is that there's a group of people who want to live in luxury, and the means by which they live in luxury is by causing other people to live in poverty. That's the evil of slavery. It's really rooted in greed or avarice, the desire for me to live in luxury and ease and comfort by causing other people to basically do their work and mine, so that I can take the leisure and comfort of both of our lives and enjoy it all myself, and I can transfer my work to them. So they bear the burden of double work, and I enjoy double pleasure. That's the idea of slavery. We see here that when she has servants helping in the house, she has her own domestics, and you might say, oh, I wish I had. Well, it's not that big of a deal, because you've got conveniences that she couldn't dream of. So don't think that because she has domestics, she has it easy, and poor you don't have any servants around the house. You've got lots of servants around the house. They just are run by electricity. Her domestics, however, are clothed with double garments. In other words, she takes care of her inferiors. She sees them, she's kind to them, she thinks of their needs. She doesn't, give them the bare minimum. They're clothed in double garments. She provides for those who help her. She's considerate of their needs. She's not a slave owner. She's not making these poor people work like dogs while she sits by the fireplace with a coat and, a nice blanket wrapped around her shoulders while they're walking bare feet on freezing cold floors. She has no fear for her house in the cold of snow. All her domestics are comfortably clothed and prepared for the weather. So she's good to them. She's generous. She provides for them. Verse 22, she hath made for herself clothing of tapestry, fine linen, and purple is her covering. She hath made for herself. Notice she's not dressed like, some Walmart bargain shopper. She doesn't have this pecunious spirit where she's trying to, she's coupon cutting and looking for every deal, trying to live according to the Walmart mantra, less is more or whatever. No, what's it? More for less. That's not her spirit. She's not living that kind of a, penny pinching, miserable spirit. She's working. She's earning profit. She's not trying to live on yesterday's work forever. She's working every day. And if we look, she makes for herself clothing, fine linen, and purple is her covering. So she pursues for herself quality clothing. She pursues for herself respectable clothing. She also provides for her domestics to be comfortably clothed. She provides for herself, but how does she provide for herself? She made for herself clothing. So she doesn't just pull out the luxury catalogs. She doesn't pull out the April Cornell catalog and just start ordering, $200 dresses for herself with her husband's money. She desires quality things, not because she wants a logo or an image or a brand name on her clothing, but because she wants quality clothing. She wants clothing that actually serves the function of clothing. She wants it to be warm in the winter, comfortable to work in, and so on, durable. And in order to do that, she's got to work to provide that clothing. And she's willing to do so. She's made for herself clothing of tapestry, beautiful clothing, fine linen, and purple. This is her covering. She's not this, clearance rack scavenger trying to just always find something cheap. And I know people like to present that as being virtuous. When my wife and I were married, I told her that she was never allowed to live like that. I told her, you're not going to cut coupons. We're not going to eat what happens to be on sale at the local supermarket. You're not going to be driving around town looking for the cheapest price on this or that, or whatever the newspaper coupons are featuring. That's what we're going and buy. We're not living like that. We're going to have a regular diet. We're going to have quality foods. We're going to have quality supplies that we need, and we're going to be content with what we need and enjoy high quality supplies of the things that we need. We're not going to do this coupon cutting and all this nonsense. If we live a temperate life and are responsible and simple, we can afford high quality goods that we need, and we don't need to do all of that coupon cutting. If we're going to save some money, it's going to be by our own temperance, not by, trying to get the best deal on the frosted flakes across town. We don't need frosted flakes. So it's a different mentality. She doesn't live the coupon cutter life. She's not this lady who's trying to explain, how to get groceries for your family for $10. Is that really a generous Christian spirit? First of all, that's to me, I think that's a very selfish. It's like a welfare spirit that's just always looking to take and take and take from others. That's not the spirit of this lady. She's not like that. She's opening her hand to, she's the source. She's working that she may share. She's giving. She's the source. She's not looking at the world as some kind of game for her to play, to try to get everything as cheap as she can and beat everyone and take advantage of every deal and, grab every coupon. I don't think that's the spirit of this lady. This lady is a working woman. She's productive and generous. If she wants something nice, she makes for herself fine clothing. She's not living this Walmart clearance rack scavenger lifestyle. But at the same time, she's not luxurious, she's not wasteful, she's not intemperate, she's not dissipated with interests all over the place, doing 1,000 different things, blowing money in every direction. That's the problem with wasting money. Having quality things, that's got more to do with temperance and industry and planning and preparation than spending money. And if money does need to be spent to live a certain quality of life that's reasonable and good, like to actually have clothes that are warm in the winter, work needs to be done to generate that money. And she's willing to help do that work so that the quality of life is maintained. So I don't see, the popular modern coupon-cutting mom here in Proverbs 31, even though this stereotype is popular. I don't think that that's what this is teaching us. So let's keep moving here. We see how she clothes not only herself, but her servants and helpers in the household. While we're on that topic of the domestics, let's just talk about that for a minute, because I think this is important. Like I said, a modern woman may say, oh, it would be so nice, wouldn't it, to have some domestic help. Have a woman who comes in and cooks and cleans and who does the laundry, maybe even, does the grocery shopping and so on. We've got to remember, in the ancient world, there were no utilities. There was no running water, no electricity, no heating and air conditioning. There were no automobiles, no supermarket, no internet, no UPS or FedEx. So really take a minute and think about what life would be like in the ancient world as a woman. You wake up in the morning and there's nothing. There's no food prepared. There's no heat in the house. There's no water in the house. You can't flip the light on. You can't flip on the coffee pot. Everything has to be generated every single day. Everything has to be prepared and produced every single day. Try to imagine what that life is like. And you could say, well, this is the household of a king. That's right. So everything has to be produced every single day by this household of working people, or you just won't have anything. There won't be any food. And we've experienced that to some degree because there were some years when our kids were younger where we did a lot of farm work out here in the country. And after a while, that daily grind of doing the chores and going out and doing the work and managing the gardens and doing those things and knowing that if you stop, all of the production stops and everything falls apart. It's a very stressful life, and it depends on constant everyday work. There's no food storage. There's no freezer. You don't have canned goods in the refrigerator. All of these modern conveniences that we have, they didn't have. Everything had to be done fresh. You couldn't go kill a 400-pound, cow and bring in 200 pounds of. There's no place to keep that stuff. And so the whole lifestyle was different. And when we read about domestics, don't think for a second that this woman is like putzing around the house in some kind of leisurely idleness while these servants work in the house. Everybody had to work because there wouldn't be anything provided. And we see throughout this chapter of the Proverbs, that's what this woman is doing. She's trying to figure out what she can do every day to help. She's also managing and providing for her helpers because everyone is in this together and they all have to contribute. So it's a very different world. Now, when we fast forward to our society, 21st century America, the benefits and advantages that a housewife has are incomprehensible to an ancient person. Think about, go through my wife's day. She wakes up in the morning, she goes out into the kitchen, opens an electric refrigerator, pulls out some coffee, some milk that she picked up at a supermarket, puts on the coffee pot, electric coffee pot. The coffee pot, prepares the coffee while she's walking around doing some other things. So now a couple minutes later, the coffee's ready. There's some sugar that we got from the supermarket from who knows where. She pours the milk from the refrigerator from who knows where. And the life is so convenient. There's a laundry basket filled with dirty clothes. She just tosses them into a machine, pours in some detergent, flips a couple buttons, boom, the laundry's running, hot water pumping into the machine. Then she's got an electric dryer, so she's throwing the wet clothes into the electric dryer. Boom, hit the button. Now hot air is blowing through the dryer, drying the clothes in a few minutes. These machines and these appliances are worth dozens and dozens of domestic servants. If you think about all of the tasks that are being taken care of by these things, even things like flipping on lights. Imagine how there's no way to work into the evening hours when you think you're just going to light candles all over the place and have the house lit up every day with candles. Candles are expensive. People didn't have candles burning all the time. When the sun went down, the house was dark. So just think of how many advantages a modern housewife has. She really does have the equivalent of all these domestics. But think about it. This woman understands that she needs to take care of her domestics. How many women in households today, how many housewives take care of the appliances and equipment that helps them with their daily work and helps them to enjoy a very comfortable life? You see how there are modern applications of the principles in the Proverbs here that I don't think modern women think about. They often go for this sort of silly stereotype and become this hobby mom who's actually doing the literal things that this Proverbs 31 woman did. And that's really not what this is teaching us. She's a prudent woman. What would a prudent woman, a prudent, trustworthy, vigilant, industrious, profitable, generous, considerate woman look like in 2023? That's what we should be asking, not how we can play around with some of the tasks she did and have this sort of little colonial Williamsburg in our house where we do all these ancient crafts and pretend we're the Proverbs 31. That's not what she is. That's not what she is. Let's keep going here. Verse 23, consider the effects of her way of life. Consider the effects. Verse 23. Her husband is honorable in the gates, when he sitteth among the senators of the land. Her husband is honorable in the gates. Socially, her husband is held in honor. Why? Because his household is in order. He's respected by other men, by other members of the community, because his household is in order. Why is his household in order? Largely because of the prudence and diligence of his valiant wife. So her behavior, her work, her virtue brings him honor publicly. He is honorable in the gates when he sits among the senators of the land. Notice how he can give himself to higher consideration because he has the assistance of this valiant woman managing his household. I recommend, and I know this is getting long, I'll try to be quick as we finish up here. There's a book by a Greek philosopher named Xenophon, starts with an X, Xenophon, titled On Household Management. And you can see Proverbs 31 explained in crystal clear philosophical detail if you read that book. So I recommend Xenophon's work on household management. It's a Greek book, not a Christian book, a Greek book written 350 years before Christ. So if you want to know what it looks like for her husband to be honorable in the gates, sitting among the senators of the land, go read Xenophon's household management and you'll see an example of that. Verse 24, she made fine linen and sold it, and she delivered a girdle to the Canaanite. I'm going to try to move a little more quickly here, but we can see what she's doing. She made fine linen and sold it. And what's important about selling things is it's not some arrogant woman boasting of her own skill. Other people value her skill. Other people consider it worth buying. She sells the stuff she makes. She's not praised by herself. She's praised by the judgment of others. Her stuff is real quality stuff that others desire. Verse 25, strength and beauty are her clothing. Strength and beauty. It's common in our society for women to have this idea of strength, for mothers to have this idea of strength, and they turn into these brute ladies, sort of, bulky, I don't know, man-like women who look and act like men. That's not what this woman is like. She maintains a balance of strength and beauty. Strength and beauty. It's not out of control. It's not imbalanced. She doesn't become, sort of this beastly woman that we see. Strength and beauty continue together in her. Strength and beauty are her clothing, and she shall laugh in the latter day. In other words, her end shall be happy. She's got a prosperous future to look forward to, which we read about in Psalm 1, which I encourage you to look at. I just did a talk about that. Verse 26, she hath opened her mouth to wisdom. She's not a dum-dum. She's not some kind of ignorant, babbling, gossipy lady talking about nonsense. She's a wise woman. When she speaks with wisdom. The law of clemency is mercy, is on her tongue. She's gentle. She's wise and gentle. Her speech is wisdom and clemency. When we sing the Salve Regina, we refer to the Blessed Virgin Mary as O Clement. Same word here, right? The law of clemency is on her tongue. She is wise and gentle, wise and merciful. Verse 27, she hath looked well on the paths of her house, and hath not eaten her bread idle. She's industrious, she's vigilant, we know that. Her children rise up and call her blessed. She's praised by her children who love her and appreciate all the work that she does because they benefit from it. Their quality of life benefits from her work. They rise up. They call her blessed. Again, this isn't mom talking about how great she is, all this, mom talk, oh, nobody appreciates. No, her children call her blessed. Her husband praises her. She's praised by her husband and children. Many daughters have gathered together riches, but thou hast surpassed them all. She's a fruitful, productive woman. It literally says, many have gathered together riches, but you have surpassed them all. She's a fruitful, wise, gentle, industrious, vigilant, entrepreneurial, put all the virtues together that we've talked about. She's an amazing lady. Verse 30, favor is deceitful, beauty is vain. The woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. And here we find the secret of this woman's virtue. She's a God-fearing woman. She's a devout woman. She's not working primarily to please her husband. She's not working primarily to please her children. She's working because she's living, as we say, in the presence of God. She's living with hope of eternal reward. She fears God. That's why she is the virtuous woman, because she's living to please God. She's not deceived by favor. She's not deceived by the vanity of beauty. And of course, this beauty down in verse 30 is not the same beauty that we just talked about in verse 25. Strength and beauty are her clothing. That's different from the vain beauty of the world, and you know what that means. Favor is deceitful, In other translations, favor is translated as charm. Charm is deceitful. Beauty is vain. The woman who fears the Lord, she is the one who will live this virtuous life, and she is the one who shall be praised. Verse 31, give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates. Her works do praise her in the gates. Her children call her blessed. Her husband is held in honor. Her family never lacks anything. They're well provided for. They have a good reputation, most likely. She enjoys the fruit of her own hands. That's where her satisfaction comes from. She's a God-fearing woman. She lives a virtuous life. She's generous, industrious, prudent, on and on, all those virtues we've looked at. All of that comes from her spiritual life because she lives in the presence of God. She is rewarded with the fruit of her own hands, and her works praise her in the gates, that is, publicly. Her works praise her, the things that she does. And if you want to see an example of that, if you look in the New Testament, in the book of Acts, there's a woman named Dorcas. I'm not sure what chapter that is. You can look her up. It's Dorcas is her name, Dorcas. I think she has another name too. Might be Abigail. I don't remember. Maybe Tabitha, one of those names. But she's in the book of Acts, and she dies, and she's laying there on her deathbed, having died, and all of these people from the town are weeping around her bed, and they're all clothed with the things that she had made for them, things that she produced. She's literally praised by the work of her hands. That's the image here. Let her works praise her in the gates. So that's all for chapter 31 of Proverbs. Think about that picture that we've painted of this Proverbs 31 woman. Focus on the principles and the virtues and the different works and acts that are described, and ask, what does that look like in 2023? What does that look like in 2023? That's what women need to meditate on. Read Proverbs 31. Don't pay attention to the historical details. She's living in her own generation. She's living in her own historical context. She's living and interacting with her own market economy that she's, buying and selling. You don't live in that economy. You don't live in that community. Your life is nothing like her life. What does that woman look like in 2023? That's what women need to meditate on and think about. What do those virtues, how do those virtues translate into the 21st century? That's the challenge. Like I said before, it's also good for men to reflect on this, because when I read this, I can see the Holy Spirit in the scriptures telling me what my wife should be pursuing. Notice, it doesn't say she gets her husband a beer while he's watching TV, or she rubs his back while he lays on the couch on Saturday. No, she's got her own things to do. She's got her own spiritual life. He's doing his own work. He's being a contributing member of his community, out sitting among the elders in town. He's not bumming around the house. So we can see this picture of the whole household. If a woman is living and working like this in the house, that husband better be doing his share, because he's not even going to be comfortable around a lady like this. And we know that in this story here, the husband is King Lemuel. So he has his own work to do. But for men, it's good to meditate on this, to see what our wives should be free to do. Right? Our wives should be free to do these things. They're not our servants to just, go make me a sandwich at 2:18 in the afternoon. That's not the work of a woman. She has her own works to do. She has her own undertakings, all within the context of her own household, not this independent nonsense, just doing her own will with her kids, being babysat by somebody or stuck in daycare. And I'm sorry if that's offensive, but that's not this life. That's not this life. This lady is working and thinking and planning and sacrificing constantly for the benefit of all of the members of her household. She's working for her household. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband praises her. She's not this wild modern woman just out doing her own thing. She's working for her household. She's working for her family. And that's where the limits of this, this modern feminist nutsiness sort of needs to end. We can't just have this working woman taken out of the context, ignore the fact that she's working for her family, and just turn her into a worker who's just out and working for who knows what. That's not what this is teaching. She's not an independent, world traveler just running her own career while her kids are, eating SpaghettiOs at home. She's working for the good of her household. Not only her household, she's working for the good of poor people. She's taking care of her servants. Her children and husband call her blessed. We can see a clear picture of what this woman is like. Again, I don't think that this woman described in Proverbs 31 is the stereotypical Christian homeschool mom. I don't think that that's what's in this passage. I think that this woman has a much more virtuous life, much more active life, much more challenging life. And I think women really need to take time and stop listening to the conference speakers and to the homeschool, authors and all these like celebrity ladies that run around running their conferences and ministries and all this stuff. Read the scriptures. We have a description right here of this valiant woman in detail in Proverbs 31. It's not this stereotypical conference lady that's talked about at the homeschool conference. It's not Susie Homemaker. It's not, the unschooling homeschool mom who's sitting in the backyard with her kids, exploring the leaves on the tree. This is an industrious lady. This is a responsible woman who's collaborating with her husband to enjoy the happiest and most blessed life possible, being driven by her own devotional life. So I think it's challenging, and it needs to be meditated upon afresh in this generation with all of our different circumstances. We need to draw the principles out and then ask what they look like in modern applications. So if you'd like to talk about that, to be honest, I don't want to take up those discussions. I've got my own things to do, but I'm sure that my wife would love to discuss these things. She's thinking about and talking about these principles all the time. So if you're a woman and would like to get into these things, I encourage you to contact my wife and take up that discussion. But I hope that that's a helpful walk through this passage, and I encourage you to read this text for yourself, Proverbs 31, meditate on it, and please, if there are some things in there that you as a mother and wife see and think of and can share, please share them. I'm sure that you've got plenty of insights from your own experience as to the significance of the things that we've read. Hopefully what I shared was helpful. So that's all for Proverbs 31. I do hope that was helpful. Feel free to comment or contact us if you've got any questions or would like to dig into this a little bit. Also, social media. We have a classical Catholic homeschooling Facebook group on Facebook. You can look up and sign up for and join that group. That'd be a great place to discuss this stuff. So there's plenty of opportunity to dig into this, and I hope that women will do that. God bless.